Jordan called his dad and finally brought it up. "Dad, I've been thinking, maybe Stanford's not the right place for me." There was a pause. Jordan could feel the weight of his father's silence, and in that moment, he wasn't sure how Zach would respond. Transferring wasn't giving up, but would his dad see it that way? Zach's answer was measured, almost cautious. "It's your decision, Jordan, but remember why you're there. Think about what you want long term." No judgment, no strong push either way, just a reminder that Jordan needed to figure out what was best for him. It wasn't a rejection of the idea, but it also wasn't an endorsement. His dad, as always, was leaving the final decision to him. In his first game at USC, and by USC I mean the South Carolina Gamecocks, they would play against Miami. Jordan still needed to earn the starting running back spot, which left him playing a lot of receiver, and he still needed to earn the trust of his quarterback, Lenora Sellers, who threw a pick to begin the second quarter. Sellers did make up for it on the next drive, absolutely threading the needle between the safety and the cornerback for a touchdown to take the lead in the third, but it wouldn't be enough as Miami would come back to take the win 31-24, and Jordan really didn't do anything. The first game being an L is obviously what Jordan was hoping to avoid, moving to the SEC and playing for a talent-heavy roster like South Carolina, but this is where we are. Jordan and the Gamecocks would have a get-right game against the FCS East, where Jordan could showcase his skills more and prove that he deserved more touches and more trust from his quarterback. Jordan continued to put his skill set on tape, taking several design plays for extra yards, picking up first downs, and making catches consistently out of the backfield. The offense struggled to get into the end zone, but when Jordan's number was called, he made plays, and he showed that he deserved more touches if the offense wanted to function. Selfishly, Jordan was more interested at this point in going to the league than team success. He was so used to churning out 5-7 losing seasons that he approached the game more like a businessman in order to keep his own sanity. There was also a little bit of ego left to Jordan's game. He saw himself as LaShawn McCoy, but really played like a one-cut receiving back. He didn't typically have explosive jukes or breakaway speed. He was more Austin Eckler than Shady McCoy, and that could still get him drafted. The game was stuck at a disgusting score of 3-2 until midway through the third, and Jordan was getting some rest on the sidelines, and the offense went out and scored their only touchdown of the day versus a Division II school, which sounded the alarms a little bit amongst boosters and diehard fans. Jordan came in for the final possession and helped run the clock out, and South Carolina would come out with the win 13-5 over FCS East. And then after the game, Jordan also upgraded his elusiveness, continuing to get better. In week 3, South Carolina and Jordan would have their biggest test of the season, going against undefeated number 4 Texas. Despite getting stopped on 3rd and 2nd and forcing the 4th down and the punt to start the game, South Carolina did score the first touchdown to take a 7-0 lead, but Texas took 24 straight points on the board, and it was 24-7 before Texas took a commanding 31-12 lead in the 4th quarter with 4 minutes remaining. And Jordan got to show off a little bit of his ability to catch out of the backfield in this game, but Lenora Sellers was selling in this game. He had 150 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, and Texas would roll away with the win 31-19 in division. And Jordan was off to a decent start, averaging 5.5 yards per carry, but still no touchdowns to speak of. South Carolina was just different. Everything felt a little bit more laid back, but at the same time, there was an intense passion for football that Jordan hadn't experienced on the West Coast. Jordan's first few days on campus were a whirlwind of new faces, new routines, and a whole lot of questions. Moving into his new apartment, he found himself missing Mike, his old roommate from Stanford. Mike had eventually opened up more about his family issues, and they'd grown closer again before Jordan left. Now as Jordan unpacked his bags alone, it hit him how much had changed. He traded the familiar West Coast campus for the heat of South Carolina, the academic pressure of Stanford, for the football-crazed world of the SEC. But new wasn't necessarily bad. His new teammates welcomed him with open arms. They knew who he was, a big-name transfer from Stanford, the son of Zach Meadows. That came with some respect, but also some expectations. It was clear that they thought he'd be a game changer, someone who could come in and contribute right away. Jordan wasn't naive. He knew the SEC was no joke. He had to prove himself all over again, which was both exciting and terrifying. This Kentucky game was a perfect venue for that. South Carolina needed to regain a winning record, and while 2 early losses would likely end their chances of competing for an SEC title or playoff berth this season, a bowl game was still a prerequisite for transferring to South Carolina to begin with. And Jordan would make his statement in this game as he scored another touchdown for South Carolina that gave them a 3-possession lead going into the 4th quarter. South Carolina would narrowly pull out the victory 27-24. During one of his first weekends off, Jordan flew back to California to visit his family. It was the first time he'd seen them since the transfer, and there was a sense of finality in the air, like he'd officially closed the Stanford chapter of his life. His dad had picked him up from the airport, and as they drove through the familiar streets of his hometown, Jordan felt a mix of nostalgia and relief. Zach was as calm and supportive as ever, though Jordan could tell his dad had his own thoughts about the transfer. They talked about football, about South Carolina, but Zach never pushed. He didn't have to. Jordan could feel the unspoken question hanging in the air. Was this the right move? "Proud of you for making the call, though," Zach finally said as they pulled into the driveway. "A lot of guys stay stuck, afraid to make a change." Jordan didn't say much in return. His dad had always been the strong, silent type, letting his actions speak louder than his words. But hearing those words meant something. It made Jordan feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't running away from anything. He was running towards something better for once. But that feeling would fade quickly as Arkansas intercepted the pass with a minute remaining, and South Carolina would fall to 2-3. Football at South Carolina was everything that Jordan had expected and more. The intensity of the practices, the size of the players, and the speed of the game, it was on a whole different level from anything that he'd experienced in the past. The coaches didn't coddle anyone. It didn't matter if you were a transfer from Stanford or a highly touted recruit from the South. If you couldn't hang, you'd be left behind. Jordan was determined not to be left behind. Early mornings turned into late nights as he threw himself into practice, the playbook, and the weight room. His new coach, Coach Harris, was a tough but fair man who had a reputation for molding great running backs. He saw potential in Jordan, but didn't let him coast on his name or his past. If anything, Jordan felt like Coach Harris pushed him harder because of it. "The SEC isn't the Pac-12, Coach Harris said one afternoon after practice. "We don't care what your last name is. You got to earn every inch here." And Jordan respected that. He didn't want special treatment. He wanted the chance to prove he belonged on his own performance. In Week 6, he finally had that breakout performance with 15 carries for 120 rushing yards and a touchdown, but he immediately got a message from his academic advisor again telling him that he was close to failing his classes. His initial stats at this point in the season was still averaging 5 yards a carry and 65 rushing yards, and his receiving game was still really good too. He was averaging 21 receiving yards per game, and he also upgraded his ability to juke out defenders. Coming off an absolutely elite performance in Week 6, Week 7, Jordan was looking to do more of the same, but he barely got any opportunities against Mississippi State as South Carolina won 10-7, and McAllister got the bulk of the workload. But adjusting to life off the field was another challenge. Making new friends wasn't as easy as it had been at Stanford. Jordan missed the old banter that he'd have with Mike and the inside jokes that they'd have with other teammates. Here, everything felt a little bit more distant. He was still the new guy, and while the players were friendly, they weren't quick to let him in. One of the few people that he clicked with right away was his new roommate, Josh, a wide receiver from Georgia. Josh was easygoing, the type of guy who could find the humor in anything, and they bonded over late-night talks about life, football, and their shared love of old-school hip-hop. But even with Josh around, Jordan still felt a little out of place. South Carolina was different, and so were the people. He also found himself getting frustrated with how quickly people here made assumptions. Some of the players seemed to think Jordan had it easy because of his dad's name or his time at Stanford, but they didn't know the half of it. They didn't know how hard it had been to leave, to start over. They still didn't know that the pressure that came with being Zach Meadows' son, especially when you were still trying to figure out who you were beyond that. During Jordan's junior year at South Carolina, his younger brother, Zacchaeus, was dealing with his freshman year at Army. As a quarterback, Zacchaeus had taken an immense physical beating, enduring hundreds of hits that left him physically and mentally drained. Despite his toughness and desire to uphold the family's military legacy, the relentless toll of playing quarterback at Army became too much. In their phone calls, Zacchaeus confided in Jordan about the pain and exhaustion, admitting that he couldn't continue at that pace. As Jordan adjusted to life in the SEC, Zacchaeus' journey served as a reminder of the importance of carving out your own path. Both brothers had taken risks by transferring or thinking of transferring, moving beyond the expectations placed on them to pursue what was best for their futures. Though on separate coasts, they remained connected, sharing in the challenges and growth that came with making tough but necessary decisions. After coming off a tight loss versus a ranked Florida team in the previous week, South Carolina had another challenging game against a ranked Utah team when they were down 17-7 in the third quarter. After Jordan's breakout performance versus Auburn, he had 2 straight duds against Mississippi State and Florida. In the Utah game, Jordan was having another classic performance where he got more yards than expected on designed runs, he made plays in the passing game, but he kept getting subbed off the field in the red zone, or Sellers would throw a bad pick, or someone would fumble. It was the little things that kept biting South Carolina. For all the talent they had, their play was incredibly inconsistent, which drove Coach Harris crazy. It was still a tight game in the third quarter, but Jordan saw little action after the end of the third as they passed the ball a lot, and they ended up losing 24-21. Jordan had 19 carries for 130 yards. Now here's where the schedule got crazy. Jordan and the Gamecocks needed 2 wins in their last 3 games to secure a bowl game. First, they would play against number 14 Georgia. The following week would be number 6 Tennessee, and the final week was against number 5 Clemson. This is what Jordan signed up for, and Jordan was going to get the full SEC experience these final couple of weeks. The game plan for South Carolina was more of the same, and Jordan was getting tired of Coach Harris fast. He was sick of getting the team to the red zone just to be sent to the sideline for the offense to sputter with him out. Coach Harris promised a lot with Jordan coming to Carolina, and was looking more and more like the wrong decision. Not to say that staying at Stanford or Stanford was doing any better. Jordan liked living alone a little bit away from his family, but Carolina did not have the same appeal deal as Cali. Jordan had high expectations for Lenoris Sellers, and he did not live up to the hype, consistently throwing bad balls that turned the tide of games, and if it wasn't a failed third down conversion killing a drive, it was another Sellers pick. The defense did their best to guard Georgia, but ultimately, South Carolina couldn't do enough on offense and only put up 10 points on the board, as Georgia would win the game 24-10, meaning that South Carolina would need to win their next 2 games. Jordan prepared for this to be his last game at South Carolina. If they lost, they would officially be knocked out of even making a bowl game, something that Jordan just could not abide. So Jordan prepared himself like he did every other week to go into Tennessee and do everything in his power to positively affect the game. He couldn't worry about Coach Harris pulling him near the red zone, but if he got a touch, he knew he needed to be impactful against this Tennessee squad. Jordan got off to a hot start, averaging 5 yards per carry, and they had a couple of big runs early in the second quarter drive that led them to another touchdown, although Jordan did get pulled for red zone shots on this drive. In the third, Coach Harris was literally pulling everything out of the bag of tricks. You could sense that he didn't trust Sellers to take shots on the field, so he got creative with wide receiver sweeps and then some sweep reverses. Carolina was down 10 near the end of the third, but Coach Harris kept calling Jordan's number for some bailouts. Jordan had one big run to put the Gamecocks in good field position to start the fourth quarter, and then Jordan did it again with another nice run to get down to the 15, at which point he got benched again and the offense settled for a field goal once again. With a minute remaining in the game, almost all hope was lost, down by 7, but a USC receiver beat their man on the sideline, and Sellers finally made the correct read with an accurate ball that led the receiver enough for him to take it for the touchdown. The game went to overtime, and stunningly, Jordan didn't get to touch the ball even once. Tennessee celebrated, South Carolina was done for the postseason, and Jordan was ready to fly back to California. Jordan made what Antonio Pierce would call a business decision, flying back to California, which rubbed a lot of his teammates the wrong way before their game against Clemson. Despite a vaunted passing offense, Lenoris Sellers finished the season with 2,000 passing yards, and Jordan Akira Meadows finished with 800 rushing yards, along with 4 rushing touchdowns, and it was made clear to the whole team that Jordan would be transferring to a different school, and we'll look at that for his senior season. But Jordan did make All-SEC second team as a running back.